Okay, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to our 179th Wedding Online Sports Economics Seminar. We have a first this week. We have a three-way Roses seminar presentation, which will be between Stefan Szymanski, Robbie Butler, and Justin Duran. And they will all at different points present. And I'm very much looking forward to how this will turn itself out. I'm going to assume you guys are happy to take questions as you go along. I've got a nod from Stefan, so that's good. And you've got about an hour, as you know, and there's plenty of time for Q&A as we go along. Yeah, I've got nothing else to say. So, Stefan, if you're going first, please do take away your talk.
Okay, thanks a lot, James. So this paper is actually an outcome of a Roses talk. So a couple of years ago, Robbie and Rob Simmons were presenting a paper on horse racing, and we got into an argument in that seminar about trying and effort and shirking. And as you know, then I go on and on about how shirking is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous concept. But what Robbie revealed in that seminar was that there's actually, he said, not only is there shirking, but there's actually punishment for shirking, because there is a punishment in horse racing for the jockey failing to try. And that really piqued my interest, and so this has led to us collaborating on this paper. So I'm going to show you now, again, Robbie found this. This is a horse race from just this Monday. And this is about halfway into the race, and you can see it's sort of, they're all bunched together. And I want to show you, I'm not sure how well the video is going to work, but I want to show you what happened in this race. It should start in a moment.
As they now reach the final 3 furlongs. Liberty.
I think you might have little interruptions here as we go through. But
Mountain now pressing on, Bogar's being ridden along. Fast. Side Bluffer on the bus, and then comes Knights Over Egypt, who's trying to stay on. Then in behind that is El Montagine, Bluffer on.
Donald Trump speaks his mind, and on the issue of abortion, he spoke.
Sorry, it's America.
That is very funny.
In it.
No, I'm not in favor of abortion.
It's going to carry on.
On the bus now takes it up with 2 furlongs to go. Bluffer on the bus has kicked for home under Matthew Lloyd Slater. So going on then from in second place, being ridden along now is Liberty Mountain, and then comes Knights Over Egypt in third. Bluffer on the bus has a commanding advantage and is about 5-6 lengths in front here, well inside the final furlong. Knights Over Egypt moved into second place, but a remote second, heading up towards the line. It's Bluffer on the bus by about 4 or 5 lengths, just being eased down towards the finish by Matthew Lloyd Slater. And coming is Knights Over Egypt, who is closing the gap close home and has got there. Knights Over Egypt.
All right. Well, the slow motion might actually have helped there a little bit.
May have just got there from Bluffer on the bus.
So our talk here is about what you just saw and what you think just happened. Do you think, well, so here's what actually happened. So he was along the Bluffer on the bus, the rider Matthew Slater was way in the lead, and then he gets caught at the line by this by the other horse, and a race that he was comfortably winning, he loses. So the question there is, what do you think he was doing? What was he doing? And I would suggest to you there are two possible explanations. One is that this guy just screwed up royally and made a terrible mistake, and that's what happened. A second explanation is that he was cheating in some way, shirking or failing to make adequate effort. And actually, that's what was decided by the stewards, as you can see, by the stewards of the race. As you can see there at the bottom, it says he was suspended for 28 days for failing to take all reasonable and permissible measures to obtain the best possible placing on a horse that would have finished first. So that's not trying. He was, so of course, again, that's what economists say called shirking, but that's what he was found guilty of. And this happens, that's a very extreme example of this case, it's fair to say. But this happens fairly often. And jockeys, when they are found guilty of not trying, are faced with fines and suspensions. So what we've done in this paper is to look at a large sample of horse jockey race outcomes, all scraped from the Racing Post. And we want to ask ourselves the question, really two things. Is there any evidence that the non-triers were in any way exceptional other than having a bad race? And is there any evidence that there is any potential strategic gain to the from the non-trying event? I'll explain a little bit what that means in a moment. But what we find is we find in both cases we find that there is no evidence. It's not these are not exceptional events in the class of bad races. Lots of jockeys have bad races and don't get punished for not trying. And there is no evidence that this forms part of a long-term strategy to benefit. And so that question then is, why do they do this? Why do they punish the jockeys like this when it seems essentially arbitrary? And we conclude that it is pour encourager les autres. It's a kind of a disciplining device for the jockeys. And we'll talk. I'll talk a little bit that right at the very end about why that might be. So let's start off with trying.
Sorry, Stefan, can you share the slides? Because we can't see them here, if you don't mind. We're still on, unless we're the only ones.
Oh, James?
Yeah, you're still showing us. You're still showing us the end of the YouTube clip.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So, okay, let me just do. Apologies. Okay, so now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Very sorry. So, so as I say, we're going to do this in three parts. I'm going to talk first about the theoretical issue and what the theoretical issues in around trying and effort. Then Robbie's going to give you more background on the horse racing and the rules and regulations on which he is an expert. And then Justin's going to explain our results. Okay, so in the moral hazard problem in economics has a very long and storied history. There are essentially, the idea is that output is a function of effort and luck, and the principal cannot observe the effort of the agent. And that in those situations, you have two real solutions for the principal. The principal can either offer the agent an incentive payment to increase the agent's payoff with the output. The effort is unobservable, but the agent now has an incentive to supply effort because they receive a share of the output that they produce. And the second approach is monitoring. So you appoint a monitor and then punish the agent if their observed effort differs from the required level. So this is this literature really was very well established, 50 years ago. And so the results are relatively straightforward. Now, in horse racing, really you have, we want to think about who's involved in the game, as it were. You have a number of players that you could think of. So you have the owner of the horse, the trainer of the horse, you have the jockey themselves, you have the race organizer, you have the punters who gamble on the outcome of the race, and of course you have the horse itself. Now, we're not going to say anything about whether the horse itself is trying. We're going to take that as being something we have no insight into, whatever. And so really we're focusing on, as the punishment does, is focusing on the jockeys and their relationships with these other players in the game. And I think one point to bear in mind is that if it weren't for the presence of gambling, the incentive problem would actually be much simpler. This would be just an incentive problem between the owner, the trainer, and the jockey. And they would presumably settle that in some way to their own mutual satisfaction. But because of gambling, the incentive problem suddenly becomes much more complex. So you could think of really two problems that could arise in this context. So one problem is what conventionally we might call match fixing, which might be what you think was happening in that race that you just saw. Actually, it turns out that in that race, the horse that was in the lead but ends up coming second was actually the favorite of the race, and the horse that actually finally ended up winning was actually had much longer odds. So in that sense, maybe there was a profit potential in that race. However, that race is kind of unusual in the sense that it's not usually the case that these non-trying horses are, these non-trying events are associated with the difference between coming first and second. They're much more likely to be about the difference between coming third and fourth, or fourth and fifth, or fifth and sixth. And so in that sense, this kind of match fixing motivation seems much less likely to be prevalent in the sorts of races where the bans are imposed. A second, though, perhaps more serious form of cheating, if you will, would be some kind of strategic underperformance. So imagine you've got a good horse and you want to enter it into a race in the future, which a big race which it can win. So one thing you want, though, when it enters into that big race and wins it, you might want the betting odds to be very much in your favor, or you might want in the case where horses are handicapped, and handicapping occurs when a good horse is given extra weight to ride in order to equalize the competition. You might want to try and persuade the handicappers who decide these weights to give you a very light handicap so that you will have an advantage in the race. So in other words, by underperforming in this race, you might gain a strategic advantage in a future race. So we want to, and we're going to test to see whether there's any evidence of this strategic underperformance. Now, the incentive structures in horse racing really are a bit weird, I think. I think it's probably fair to say. So firstly, the prizes, and Robbie's going to show you something about the actual amount of the prizes, but overwhelmingly the prize money goes to the owners of the horses. So the jockeys are really not really very much involved in this incentive payments. The incentive payments for the jockeys are actually relatively small. But then there are these, so these are the, if you like, these are the intents to provide. The incentive mechanism is perhaps not particularly strong as far as the jockeys. Stronger for the owners, perhaps, but not so much for the jockeys. But then you have these other monitoring effects, and actually there are two kinds of monitoring going here. There's not trying hard enough, which is what we're focused on here, but there's also a penalty for trying too hard. And trying too hard is somewhat easier to measure. It's just measured by the number of times you use the whip. And of course, using the whip in horse racing is a somewhat controversial issue. Anyway, basically, if you use it more than 3 or 4 times in a race, you will get penalized as trying too hard. But you know, there's still sort of controversy about how much of the whip should be allowed in horse racing. But then, obviously the what we're focusing on in this paper is the penalty for not trying hard enough, which is levied on the jockey, and it's not really levied on the owner. Now, the owner, there can be an impact for the owner if the horse itself is banned from a future race, but that's it's unlikely that the horse is going to be banned in perpetuity, and so the horse will come back at some point. It's also usually not the trainer who is penalized for not trying, even though the trainer is responsible for instructing the jockey on how to run the race. So very much the jockey is fingered as if there's evidence, if there's a claim of non-trying, it's very much the jockey who is held responsible, despite the fact that this is a co-production with the owner and the trainer. So how would you really know if someone is not trying? I mean, the obvious point is you can't. Trying is a state of mind. That's like shirking is a state of mind, and we don't observe states of mind. And my sense is always that economists are massively over optimistic about their ability to observe the states of minds of others, which is a problem. How do we observe states of mind? Well, what we do is we use visual cues. We look and we take the look, and then we decide on the basis of the look whether we think they're trying or not. And the one question is, how reliable are these inferences based on just looking? And I would suggest to you pretty unreliable. And it's easy to confuse effort with other motivations. So, for example, what you might think is that jockey was cheating, that jockey was deliberately not trying, or was not given up trying. Maybe he was trying, but he just had a brain freeze. That happens. Somebody says, you know, it's like saying, if you submit a paper to a journal and if the journal desk rejects it, that means that you weren't trying. I don't think that follows at all. I think maybe it wasn't a terribly good paper, but it doesn't mean that you weren't trying to write a good paper. And so I think it's taking these kind of observables is problematic. It's also the case that in many cases, the one person who has a sense of the state of mind of the horse, of course, is actually the jockey. So the jockey knows whether the horse is happy in the race, whether the horse is getting tired, whether the horse is maybe struggling for some other reason. And therefore, one reason why you might ease up on the horse is actually because you were concerned about the horse's welfare. Impossible to prove one way or the other, but still it's possible. And if you're convicting somebody for not trying, you really need to be sure that there aren't other explanations. Let me give you an example of, though, I think, which I think is a very cute example of what of how people infer trying. And one way is called, so I never knew the origin of the phrase hands down. If you wins hands down, what's the origin of that saying? We know if wins hand down means you win by a lot, right? Well, hands down it's a horse racing reference. So if your horse is miles ahead, as that was in the as it was for Butler on the bus in the horse race you just saw, you would actually a jockey to ease up would actually drop their hands. So they hold the reins up tight normally, but they would drop their hands if they were so far ahead that they didn't really need to make any effort involved. And actually, if you look at the video in this particular case, that's not what was happening in this case. The jockey did not drop his hands, which is sort of an interesting piece of evidence. But if you did drop your hands in a race, you would almost certainly, I think, get convicted of not trying. So hopefully I've at least put in your mind the idea that it's really not easy to identify if someone's not trying. So let's now move on to Robbie, who's going to talk you through the context in British horse racing.
Thanks, Stefan, for that lovely introduction. So what I'm going to try and do is talk to you sort of about the practicalities of this in more detail, and also tell you where we got our data from to to try and empirically test. I'm conscious of the fact some people might know very little about horse racing. I was looking at the list of people that are here online, and there's a couple of people that know an awful lot about horse racing, so it's great to see them here. But in case you're unfamiliar with the sport, I mean, the video that Stefan presented, I suppose, is a good snapshot of what actually happens. So they're very similar to other professional sports athletes. They're under intense scrutiny. That's something that's grown through time, where every race in these shores now is broadcast live on either subscription television or terrestrial TV. So as we speak, there's horse racing going on. It's actually this weekend. It's the perfect weekend to do this presentation because it's a very big weekend for horse racing. Right now, there's racing in Down Royal and Wetherby, and tomorrow there's Ascot, and there's the Breeders' Cup tomorrow in the United States. So it's an industry that is, you know, it's very important. It takes a lot of scrutiny, and you know, I suppose it's a great example of cooperation, what we're trying to do here, because you have different parties, from trainer to owner to jockey and other stakeholders, that they're trying to execute a plan. So typically the trainer is the one that directs the jockey how to ride the race. If you read, sometimes you read autobiographies from jockeys and things like that, you know, some trainers tend to try and micromanage, others don't, but generally there's some sort of directions to how to ride. It's widely believed in the industry that the prize incentive might not be adequate to exert maximum effort, and that's something that historically would have come to life when you had famous incidences of non-trying. So the reason you would have had non-trying is because of the rewards from misrepresenting the ability of a horse, not in a current race, but in the future race. And I'll try and speak to you about that in a minute, the types of races that we look at. Can you go on there, Stefan, the next one? So because of the issue of non-trying, the BHA have a formal constraint that prevents jockeys from doing so. So if you look at the BHA rules, the key rule is Rule 45.1, and they subdivide it into two different categories. And they say a jockey must ride in the horse throughout the race in such a way he can be seen to have made a genuine attempt to obtain from his horse timely, real, substantial effort to achieve the best possible position. So, I mean, there's issues here of execution of strategy, not just strategy, but you're doing it at the right time and in the right way and in the right fashion in order for the horse to finish in the highest possible place. And also be seen to take all reasonable and permissible measures throughout the race, however it develops, to ensure the horse is given the full opportunity. So the horse is ridden in such a way that they're not boxed in, or they're not, they don't have their path to victory or a high place position obstructed in the manner in which the jockey sort of rides the horse. So that's what I suppose the prescriptive rule says. So we wanted to explore this further. So the first thing we have to understand is, well, who decides if this rule is not applied? So if you want to go on there, Stefan, we turn to the stewards, because the stewards have been involved in racing since racing was a sport, essentially. So you can go back hundreds of years. Chester is over 500 years old. And stewards have always been involved, and the objective of the steward is to ensure the integrity of the racing, not just from a sporting perspective, but importantly from a betting perspective, because as we know, betting and the sport have been inextricably linked for centuries. So the steward is there to maintain the integrity. Normally, it's a panel of 3 people. So you have somebody representing the BHA, which is the British Horse Racing Authority. They are the chief steward. You have the panel chair, and then you have a BHA steward as well. So what they do is they observe the race. Now, if you watch horse racing, I watch quite a bit of it, you'll find that most races end with no steward's inquiry. But on occasion, you have what we call a steward's inquiry. Sometimes it can be very visible, because you might see interference in a race, or you might see something unusual happen, or you might see what happened in the video that Stefan showed you, where a jockey doesn't ride out to finish and then gets caught. So quite quickly over the intercom, you will hear that there's a steward's inquiry. Sometimes it's more opaque. You don't know why there's a steward's inquiry, but they have seen something, and that might come to light afterwards. So what happens with the inquiry, and sometimes these are actually televised. If you're watching horse racing on TV, they're actually really interesting to watch. I suppose it'd be like the football equivalent of being able to see into the VAR room as the referees actually dissect the decision. So the jockeys will be called in, they're on camera, the stewards will be there, and they will be asked then to sort of explain what happened in the race. So essentially the jockeys then have to defend their position. And they are obviously the agent, as Stefan said, for the trainer and the owner, was really important. And they'll try and defend their actions and say why they were right and why they should hold the race if they've won it, or why what was done to them was they were wronged and that they would have finished higher if something hadn't have happened. And then if there's a breach, the panel will then decide whether a breach has occurred, and that will be recorded in the steward's report. So it depends on the nature of the breach. So in the case of the video you saw at the start, the poor jockey, he got a 28-day suspension. So a 28-day suspension would be, it would be very much at the extreme end of things for a jockey to be suspended for that long. You go on there, Stefan? So what we were able to do then was access data from two sources, Racing Post and the British Horse Racing Authority. And what we wanted to do was match up the races with the incidence of non-trying. So fortunately, Stefan was the inspiration behind the large data set. We managed to acquire over 300,000 horse jockey combinations through time from January 2012 all the way up to December 2021. So it's 12,000 race meetings and about 84,000 horses. So we have this quite sizable data set. And then I had the job of going through the VHA reports, so I had to read these. Now, fortunately, there's not 311,000 stewards reports because they happen frequently enough, but not that frequently. But we had to check for incidences of the rule breach. So prior to September 2019, it just had a different classification. It was called Rule F37, but after that, it's Rule 45.1. But it's essentially the same rule. And in total, we were able to identify 276 breaches. So we have 276 observations, treatments essentially, where we have jockeys that are suspended. There were other instances where a horse would be suspended or a trainer would be fined, but the jockey wouldn't be suspended. But we were interested in the jockey here in this research. The fine was levied on the trainer. They were ever suspended for non-trying, and the suspension on the horse, as Stefan said, is to get at the owner because the horse then can't run for a certain period of time. And we match these up to the races that they occurred in. Can you go on there, Stefan? So just to give you an overview of some of the data, so there's our total number of suspensions. You can see them across seasons. So it's pretty consistent. 2016 was quite low, and 2019 was low because of the cessation of racing after Cheltenham Festival due to the COVID-19 outbreak. But you're talking, on average, jockeys are getting suspended for somewhere between sort of 5 to 8, 9 days. The median values, then you can see, they range from 2 up to 10. The maximum suspensions vary. So in some years, the maximum suspension was only 2 weeks. In others, it was quite excessive, 40 days. That would be for a serious breach or possibly for repeated breaches of this rule by the same jockey. And then you can see the number of days that were lost. So in total, nearly 2,000 days were lost, 2 jockeys from suspension over the decade that we were able to access data to. Want to go on there again, Stefan? So just to tell you about the classification of races, because this is important, because races are different. Again, if you're not familiar with horse racing, this is done in order to try and ensure interest in the sport. So there's a couple of issues here. One is uncertainty of outcome, the other is competitive balance. elite races, races that would be called graded races in jump racing, or group races in flat racing. So jump racing is where they run over fences. Flat racing is more prestigious because of blood stock and breeding and stuff like that. They just run on they don't run over fences. The elite races would have essentially no handicapping. So what that would mean is all horses would run off level weights. So you'd have a fair idea of who the most likely winner is before the race starts, simply by virtue of previous form. And the horses are not homogeneous. The abilities vary, and there's no mechanism to try and even them out. Other races then, maybe the ones that are more interest in the public, like the Grand National, for example, try to maximize uncertainty of outcome. So they're called handicaps, because the handicapper places weight on horses based on past performance. So the best horse will have the highest weight, and then subsequent horses will have lower weight based on their rating, essentially. And what the handicapper is trying to do is he or she is trying to create a scenario whereby the outcome is very uncertain. You don't really know who's going to win. And in the case of non-trying, this is important, because if non-trying is an issue and a jockey or trainer or owner decides to misrepresent ability, what it means is that the handicap mark will be lower in subsequent races. And what that would mean is the horse would have a better chance than their rating would suggest to win a race. Now, there is also another group of horses, and these are young horses. So in flat racing, they would be fillies and colts. In jump racing, they would be what are called novices. They typically run between the ages 2, 4, maybe 5. And because they're so young, nobody knows how good they are. So they can't run in handicaps, because in order to get a handicap mark, you have to run a certain number of races. So these are what we call non-elite, non-handicap. They are essentially carrying the same weight, simply by virtue of the fact that they are all young and we don't really know the abilities at this point in time. You want to go on there, Stefan? So how do the races compare? So just some prize money data on the races in our entire sample, and then the races where non-trying happened. You can see some average prize money. It's generally the same. We do find that the races where non-trying was identified, where this breach of rule 45.1 happened, tend to be slightly lower in value across the board, but it's not significantly lower. I mean, prize money in most British racing is not spectacularly high. It would be one of the challenges the industry faces, particularly when you compare it to somewhere like Ireland, for example, where prize money tends to be much higher on average. Some races, the prize money would be, for winning a race, might only be £2,500, and then the pot then would be split further for finishing second and third and fourth and on down. In some cases, horses would have received prize money for finishing 7th or 8th, or as low as that. But we're not talking about huge sums of money here. If you just want to flick on to the next slide, Stefan, I can just talk to you about the jockeys. So this is sort of a snapshot of the financial cost to the jockey of non-trying. So we identified the race where the non-trying happened, and we identified the prize fund that was on offer. And a jockey receives only a small portion of this. In fact, it's 6% for winning, but we can exclude that because they don't get banned if they win. So when you look at second and third and fourth places, you're talking at somewhere between 2% and lower. So in the banned races, if a jockey had finished a place higher, it was worth on average about £5 more. So extremely small sums of money here. If it was 2 places better, you're talking around £13. And you even see the maximum, that's £204. So, the sums of money involved here are very, very low. For simply riding a horse, the jockey receives around £170. So this sort of, I suppose, the bonus incentives are very, very small. Of course, if this was a high-profile race, a graded race, or a group race, the sums of money can go well into the 6 figures. So it does become very attractive to win those races. if we look at the band race, the kind of row of data below, we look at the band race and think, well, how much did they forego? You know, again, and you look at the races after that, there's nothing to suggest that a misrepresentation in one race is then being followed up by trying to win a much bigger prize in races that follow, in the race after, the race after that, or 3 races out. Yeah, it is rising slightly, but again, we're talking pretty small sums of money here for somebody to possibly be out of work for 10, 14, 28 days. You want to go on there, Stefan? Oh yeah, we're over to Justin. So my co-author here, Justin, is going to talk about our empirical estimations.
Perfect. So thanks very much. I'll just go through what we did briefly first before I talk about any of the results. So we've taken a number of different approaches in terms of how we've estimated this data. We've taken a couple of different perspectives on it, and these provided us with the insights on which we're basing our conclusions and our discussion. So the first thing we have done is we have considered a kind of traditional propensity score matching approach, where what we have looked to do is match those horses which have been, or those jockeys which have received a ban, with statistically identical jockeys which did not receive a ban. So in all our kind of inputs into how they performed, that they're statistically identical, and identifying whether we have actually got a statistical difference across them in terms of the likelihood of a ban. If you want to go on to the next slide, Stefan, I'll talk briefly through that first, and then I'll just talk about how we've extended this then to look at difference in difference estimators subsequently. So I'll start with the assumption that we're not too familiar with propensity score matching techniques and what we actually do with those. So we'll actually start on the right-hand side here with the probit results. So the starting point of a propensity score matching model is essentially to look at a probit model where our dependent variable is binary in nature, indicating a value of 1 if someone received a treatment or 0 otherwise. The treatment we're defining here is in terms of the ban. So if someone received a ban, we're coding them as taking a value of 1. If they did not receive a ban, we're indicating a value of 0. And then we want to specify a model which would perhaps explain which jockeys in which races are most likely to be banned or not. And so along the left-hand side, you can see listed the various different variables we've input into this. So we have drawn these from the same, from different sources. So we've got odds, the ratings, the weight, number of runners in the actual race, the distance of the race, and also then the experience as well of the jockey. And we've just quantified that experience in terms of number of races, splitting it out into a number of different categories, where low experienced is the base category. So again, the experienced one is a binary one in nature. And when we estimate this probit model, what we can see is that there are a couple of factors which come into play here. We can see the odds doesn't have a significant effect on whether or not the jockey received a ban, but we're seeing rating and weight and distance all having some bit of an impact, and also the experience having a significant impact as well. So we're seeing generally that these are the more experienced a jockey is, the less likely they were to receive a ban. So this is kind of our baseline model in terms of our probit. What we do from this is we use a matching technique. So in this case, we've chosen to use nearest neighbor matching to match the jockey which has received a ban with a statistically identical one which did not receive a ban, based on all the variables you see in that probit model in the first instance. We do a number of alternative matching procedures. We do nearest neighbor, we do tree nearest neighbor, and we do Cornell, and the results are robust to the different approaches which we take. We're just presenting one here for simplicity. Following that, we want to identify how good a match we actually have. So we use fairly standard criteria based on this to assess the suitability of the match, including the Rubens B criteria. And we can see that our match actually works out quite well when we do this. The second step then involved in this, and you'll see this in terms of the 3 regression models on the left, race before ban, race banned, and race after ban, is that we run for the matched sample, and this is the important element here, we've matched statistically similar or statistically identical horses which have a ban with those who, or jockeys who have a ban with those who didn't get a ban. And we run our analysis based just on that match cohort. Now, in this, we've also excluded jockeys which were banned that we couldn't get a satisfactory match for. So we've used kind of standard criteria based around the standard deviation of the propensity score to identify what is an actual suitable match or not. And we've detailed that out in the write-up of this paper. And what we can see is once we make this match, the ban comes out as being insignificant. So in terms of its effect on finishing position. And on the left, you've got the race before the ban. So this is the horse received a ban. And then in the race before it received that ban, what was the performance like? We've got the race in which the ban occurred, and we've got the race after the ban. And what we're seeing in all cases here is that this is statistically insignificant. So when we match our jockeys, we don't see a significant ban effect. So essentially here, what we kind of have the idea of is that they were banned, but they're not performing necessarily worse than others who were not banned. And if we can move on, Stefan. What we do then as well to take a look at this in a bit more detail is we use a number of different indifference techniques as well on the full sample. Okay, so we apply firstly the standard kind of two-way fixed effects model, and then also this new imputation estimator, which was recently published. So again, we're only presenting some of the results here, but we have got a battery of alternative specifications for this, and the results are relatively robust regardless of the exact matching technique that we use. And here what you can see is we've got the current race in the middle, which is the race in which the jockey received a ban. We've got the time periods before that, T-1 to T-5, which is their performance in the 5 races beforehand and the performance in 5 races afterwards as well. Now this is in effect similar to the two-way fixed effects. So we're controlling for for jockey specific effects, and we're also controlling for time effects here as well. And what we've got here is the finishing position and also the winnings as well. And we've split them out based on the samples that Robbie would have talked about before, the elite sample and the handicap sample. And what we are seeing in this, the first element is in terms of kind of a robustness test. So a lot of these DID models rely on the parallel trends assumption not being rejected. Parallel trends basically is saying that before the treatment, or in this case before the ban, the horses were doing the same, that there wasn't some significant difference between them before the ban, which is explaining what we see afterwards. And we can see in general that there isn't any violations of the parallel trends assumption. There's 1 or 2 of the T-1 to T-5 variables being significant, but overall all tests on these indicate that they're not statistically different from 0 as a whole. And what we do see in the current race in this particular setup is clear underperformance where the jockey is banned. So in the finishing positions, for instance, we see significant positive effects. Do you want to take
Alex, do you want to go there?
Yeah, sorry, I just want to understand, you test this parallel trend assumption. So you have a treated horse or jockey that was banned, and who is the control group? How does it work? Sorry, I probably missed it.
Sorry, no, very good question. Sorry, the jockey, the control group are those who did not receive the ban.
Is that okay?
Again, sorry, I missed it. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So the treated cohort are those who have received a ban, and then the control group are those who have not received any ban.
But you mean the control group? Those are the guys that you found in the propensity score, or the entire population?
No, in this DID model here, we have the entire population.
Okay, because then one may ask why they are good control.
Okay, so we do have a corresponding table with this, which we can share subsequently, which is run just on the matched sample as well. And the significance levels are the same for the full group as well, except the ban for the elite sample is insignificant in that case. So we've tried to run it in a number of different ways, and we have tried to capture what you're saying in terms of looking at it as well, with just based on the matched sample from the PSM, and the results are pretty much the same. The one thing I will flag is that significant minus 0.047 for the elite sample is insignificant in the case of the matched, when we run it just for matched.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Perfect. So again, then, if we look at the subsequent performance, which is captured by the T+1 to T+5 element, we're not seeing evidence of much of a payoff in terms of the underperformance subsequently. We do see in terms of the winnings in the elite sample that they're slightly lower post-ban than would have been anticipated, but there isn't any systematic pattern in terms of the winning or finishing positions as to these horses or these jockeys subsequently performing better or worse. Perfect. And Stefan, will I hand back over to you at that point?
Okay, so this is, we just wanted to conclude by explaining the title, Pour encourager les autres, which is something the story many of you may be familiar with, but just to be clear, this relates to a story from the 18th century where a British admiral was executed because he had not done his utmost to defeat the French in a naval engagement. And historians have generally considered this to be a gross injustice. The evidence that he really didn't try to defeat the French is really pretty slim, and there were quite a number of extenuating circumstances. It was considered an injustice at the time and is still considered an injustice. And this argument, but the point that we're making is that this event was immortalized by Voltaire in the play Candide, where he explained why this had happened. Why did the British just execute their admiral? And they say, well, in this country, it's good to kill an admiral from time to time to encourage the others. And I think that's what's going on with this data, is that these jockeys, the idea that it's clear cut that these jockeys were not trying just isn't sustainable in the light of the evidence, in my view. You're trying to read someone's state of mind by the outcome and visual cues, which are profoundly unreliable. But this does have the benefit, if there is a fear that jockeys don't try, and we've seen that the incentive payments are pretty small, then maybe that this is really just a way of disciplining the remaining jockeys and making sure that they don't let up. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Justin. Really interesting talk.
Thanks, James.
Steve has his hand up first, and then Rob afterwards.
Thanks for this. This is a really interesting idea that has significant implications, I think, for lots of topics. One of the things, if I understood the table correctly, which as Stefan knows has a very high error rate, is it seemed like your point was that the financial penalty for these jockeys was relatively modest. So that your story is, if I understand it correctly, it's the same concept as the British admiral, but it's not, but they didn't kill anybody. So in that case, there's a significant, what lawyers would call a proportionality issue, which is it really fair to adopt a strategy that improved the fighting spirit of the British Navy for 3 centuries by unjustly killing somebody? But here you're suggesting that by imposing the occasional arbitrary small financial penalty on a jockey, the sport yields significant results in terms of better effort in overcoming principal agent problem. I mean, do I have that right?
Well, I would say they think they're overcoming a principal agent problem. I'm not sure they are, but I think they imagine. So this is just, it's like Steve. You want your students to pay attention in class, so you arbitrarily fail the odd student here and there just to make sure, without any reason. You just randomly pick on students. Say you're failing, you failed, you're out.
No, if I could push back there, because I think that's a version of the British Navy story. To me, the version of this is you announce that in a class where there's 100 points possible, you arbitrarily announce a 1-point penalty, calling out the student who you arbitrarily think wasn't paying attention, and you announce a 1-point penalty. And the idea there would be, well, 1 point is really not going to create a gross injustice for the student, but it's really now going to get all these other students who to pay attention because they don't want to get this penalty. So to me, there's a big difference between imposing a gross injustice to create some better benefit and creating a very small injustice which creates a greater benefit.
Well, it's always a very small injustice when it's done to somebody else, right, Steve? I mean, let's do it this way. Steve Ross submits a paper to a journal. It is desk rejected, so we cut Steve Ross's salary for a month. You're a rich guy, you can handle it. It's not going to be the end of your life, but I think you think it was pretty unfair and pretty unjust, right?
I would think it right, but as we always discuss in class, the optimal sports labor allocation is my team loses nobody I want to keep on the team, but my team can sign a free market anybody from anybody else. But once we think about it more seriously, I would say a scheme, I don't know, a month's salary seems larger than what you're talking about here.
Okay, actually, Steve, I think we should bring Robbie in here. So the point about the penalty to the jockey is the suspension, and they can't race for, say, up to 40 days. That's extreme. And then Robbie, you should explain. You were talking about how many races how much they get paid per race, and so how many races would you miss with a 14-day suspension, and what would be the full earnings?
Yeah, so I think maybe what that slide is misleading. I suppose that slide was trying to show you how insignificant the actual ban race was. But in terms of receiving a ban, it's significant. A jockey could ride 6 or 7 times at a meeting. So that's multiplied by £170 per race. So they could earn £1,000 at a meeting just from riding. That's before they have any success. Now, if you do that for a month, you're a lot of money potentially down. Now, obviously, they probably won't ride every single day, but the financial cost is not necessarily in the race they get banned. It's in what subsequently follows, and that can be sizable.
I'm going to propose this to the president of Penn State University. All faculty getting just rejected have to a month's salary. That would be the equivalent. It's kind of like desk rejection, month off.
I think Rob has a question.
Yeah, Rob.
Yeah, thanks for a really nice paper. Like what you've done there. The question I've got is pretty basic. You've modelled the probability of jockey receiving the penalty, the ban, but that's conditional on the stewards actually forming an inquiry in the first place. So I just thought you could explore that dimension a bit more formally. What's the probability of the stewards actually undertaking an inquiry? Because that's a precondition of the ban, surely. And it just strikes me that there's a lot of judgment going on here. And Stefan highlighted that with the first clip and the discussion of shirking and so on. Well, the stewards could be biased in some various ways. That would be well worth a look, I would expect. And if you think about the race itself that was at the front, suppose the odds were reversed, wouldn't there be less of a fuss about that? Because favourites coming from behind to win, even by such long distances, is fairly common, actually. So if that was the reversal of odds, there would be less of a fuss about the leading horse not making it over the line. So I think modelling the stewards' side of the story would be quite interesting here.
I think the second point to make there is definitely true. Anecdotally, at least, there would be far more pushback on a favourite losing a race than a long shot losing it. That obviously brings us into a different realm, but clearly there would be more pressure on the stewards, be it exerted by punters, people on course. And I accept the first point. I think it's a really good angle to go down. To try and understand how likely a steward's inquiry into a race is. Thanks for that, Rob.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that if we can do that, I think we should definitely look at that. That's a very good point. But I think the other point is that, I mean, again, as a non-horse racing expert, I sort of, when I look a little bit online at what people say in the light of these events, is that the punters are absolutely convinced that the jockeys are cheating, and they are absolutely convinced they're fixing it. So you see these comments, these kind of, Twitter style comments about the terrible jockey and they should be hung, drawn, and quartered, a bit like Admiral Bing. And I think the argument is, my sense is what's going on here is that the stewards are trying to keep the punters happy, because if the punters went away, horse racing would be screwed. And so the way to keep the punters happy is, again, to make an example of jockeys in specific cases and to try to persuade them. So I think if you think what's the real purpose, if it's to persuade the punters that the races are not being fixed.
Great, thanks, Rob. More questions and comments, Alex?
So thank you very much for a very nice presentation. In the beginning, I was a bit unsure, what are you doing? But then actually, well, it seems that it's very rational to cheat in this setting. And because the probability of being caught is very small. We have like 276 observed breaches, right? And probably some of them are even false positives, and maybe the majority are not even discussed, right? The financial punishment is relatively, what was there, several pounds, right? So it seems that the objective function of the organizer of tournament is really to say, I will find somebody, so the others will be afraid. So I really buy this statement. And actually, if we believe that betting odds can predict something, and in this case they don't predict anything, this means that there are so many other people that probably cheat. This is one explanation that betting odds don't predict anything. I don't know, but I guess there was David. David was there. He's a bigger expert on.
Sorry, I think the betting odds being statistically insignificant was anybody can receive a ban. It doesn't necessarily have to be a favorite or a long shot, right? So when we look at the later models, the betting odds, we didn't present them just to make the tape. They are a control, but the betting odds are actually statistically significant, and they can predict the outcome of the race. So we were actually quite relieved to see that. It's just we didn't present it. The model we presented, and it was just to see, are you more likely to get a ban if your odds are higher or lower? And what we find is anybody could get a ban. Yeah. It could be a favorite, it could be a kind of mid-priced horse, or it could be a long shot.
So the odds do explain performance in terms of finishing position and prize money, but they don't affect your probability of getting a ban. Just as likely if you're a favorite.
But my question is, do you want to show that this is really an arbitrary thing to find somebody and to punish him? Is that the aim of the study, or I missed something? Because it's basically very difficult to model the guys who will cheat, or to have, I don't know.
I suppose what we've tried to do is we've tried to show that this group that get banned are statistically identical to another group that don't get banned, Now, there's two possible explanations for that. One is that they shouldn't have been banned in the first place. The other explanation is they were all cheating, but only half of them got punished. And I think what we try to do then is when we go to the imputation models is to show that, yeah, in the banned race, performance definitely declined, right? We don't necessarily know why. We don't know whether it was non-trying or whether it was simply incompetence, or as Stefan said, brain freeze, or I mean, I think the very first clip we showed you, I don't think that was non-trying. I just think it was misjudgment. The jockey thought he had won the race and he was caught, but he has been tried by the stewards and found guilty of essentially non-trying, and he's suffering the consequences of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in a way, but you just can't model the probability of cheating or the cheating behavior because there's no real setting to. It's kind of an arbitrary call of the stewards, if I understand correctly. So this is actually
I think we're on.
right?
Yeah, I think we agree with each other.
Yeah,
it's good to shoot a general from time to time.
That's why I said at the beginning, I thought you will try to model this, but it's just.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, well, good. Yeah.
Can I just add that I'm in despair here. So you know, this seems to me to be a very clear example of arbitrary punishment for people who haven't necessarily done anything wrong. And there might be a reason why people choose to make arbitrary punishments. But it seems that I get the sense from the comments is that, oh yeah, no, it's good to have arbitrary punishments. This is not a bad thing. It's let's do this because it will make the thing more efficient. Whereas what I'm saying is no, people should not be punished arbitrarily. Period.
No, this is actually what
punishments look arbitrary. That's what I'm saying. If one could show that there was anything systematic about this, that there was some evidence that they were fundamentally different from other jockeys, then there might be grounds for saying that there was just punishment. But these basically, you're rounding up people and you're sending them to prison just because, well, they're you know, pour encourage les autres, you know, that's what's going on, right? And it's just this, we shouldn't endorse this. We should say that's wrong.
Well, in my case, I actually was with. I like to argue with you, right? But this time, I agree with you.
Whoa! Stop the recording now. That's it.
Jorge's got his hand up.
Hello. So my camera is not working. If you guys can see me, but my question is, you know, thinking about the video you showed us, the YouTube video you showed us at the beginning, you know, if you're going to cheat, why make it so obvious? Look, because I mean, the guy is winning by a mile or something like that. So, and I guess what they concluded was that he slowed down at some point. He didn't pursue to the faster he could. So my question is, you know, do you have any in your data the reason why they decided that he was actually, you know, restraining himself or something like that? You know, like I was thinking something like the VAR or penalties and stuff, or fouls. You know, now we have data what the kind of foul they're calling. You know, it's this or that. So maybe you can refine this a bit if you know the reason they are claiming that it was a ban, because, you know, if you're going to cheat, if you have this experience variable negative, that means when you're more experienced, you're going to be, the probability of being caught or being banned is going to be as lower. So if you're really experienced, you're not going to be so obvious and, you know, rush and kind of win and then slow down. So I don't know, maybe you can clean this a bit if you have this type of data, I think.
That's okay. You know, the point here is that trying is a mental state, right? Whether you are trying or not, only you know if you're trying. Nobody else really knows. And so in that sense, what's happening here is that the stewards are claiming to be able to infer your mental state from visual cues. And they don't really explain what those visual cues are properly. And you may take the view that everybody out there is cheating, that everybody cheats whenever they can. And that's maybe one view of the world. But actually, I don't see the world like that. I mean, I think some people cheat, some people don't cheat. It varies a lot, and it's pretty random, right? So, and a lot of people are very, very honest, right? And so this idea that somehow we can look at people and say, you're the bad guy, you're cheating, that just doesn't make much sense. The stewards can't do it, and we can't do it. What we could see is if there were fundamental differences between those who are found guilty of cheating and those who are not. And we can see whether there are any potential profit from the strategy of allegedly cheating, if it is cheating. We could see whether that's true. And in neither case, we can't see any difference from those who are not convicted, and we can't find any evidence of any profit from this action. So based on objective data, not based on trying to read someone's mental state, but based on objective statistical information, we have no reason to think that these people were cheating.
Just on your first point, Jorge, about the video we showed as well, why would you ban? I mean, it's a good question, because I suppose, so if you take if you take football, for example, I'm not sure, there was a match last weekend where Diego Dallo, Manchester United, managed to miss an open goal. He was about 8 yards out. He got past the goalkeeper. It looked like a really simple chance to execute, and he managed to hit the ball wide. And it was just really bad execution. But he doesn't get fined for that. He doesn't get banned for it. Nobody accuses him of not trying, or it was just bad performance. Whereas when it comes to jockeys, this incident was probably something similar, in the sense that the race was essentially won, and somehow the jockey managed to lose the race. I think the difference is that betting is integral to horse racing. Betting is part of football, of course, but it's not as integral to the same way. So there's a zero tolerance when it comes to horse racing. So incompetence is treated the same way as corruption, almost. And the bookmakers have to be seen to be doing everything to, the stewards have to be seen to be doing everything to protect the integrity of the sport. Because if the jockey came in and was genuine and said, I genuinely misjudged the line, I genuinely thought the race was won, I genuinely did, and the steward said, okay, in this case, we'll accept yours, right? That's okay.
Yeah, but I agree with you, actually.
A huge public outcry, and also it would potentially incentivize others to say, do you know what? Will we try and do that and claim we didn't? So that's why it has to be stamped out, essentially, or punished the same way. No, sorry, you go.
No, I agree with you, because in the video, I would say the guy is just incompetent, the word you're using it, or he just got excess of confidence, or whatever you want to call it. That has happened in many sports, a bunch of sports. It happens. But so if it comes to what you're really saying, it's something that why are you punishing this, I would say, almost obvious case where he wouldn't cheat. It's too obvious. And it maybe comes down to what Stefan is saying. You have to punish someone, and you have, if I remember, you have something like 84,000 races, right? And you only have 266 banned. Do you have any jockeys that have been banned twice or something like that?
There's a couple of observations of jockeys that are banned twice. Yeah, they're very limited, but it did happen to a couple of jockeys. Yeah,
we should look at those guys.
Put it another way, if you took this to a court of law, I would guess that there is no way that this judgment could be upheld. Steve, as a lawyer, might want to jump in and say that, but it just seems to me the evidence to say that this non-trying was proven seems to me to be flimsy at best. You say, you know, there's too many things that could have been going on to explain this. So that's again the sense of the obvious. And go back to it's not that the older ones know how to cheat. It's that the stewards would not dare to accuse them of cheating because they are experienced and they have more power. What they're doing is they're picking on the young jockeys because they can make an example of them without having to fear blowback when, for example, a very successful jockey, for example, might actually take them to court, might take them to the CAS or something like that and say, okay, prove it, because I think that's, you know, they have more status and power and reputation than the younger jockeys. This guy in this race was very inexperienced. He'd only run a few races.
Doesn't that go against the idea of the Admiral being killed, though? Because he was a big guy and was knocked off. But you're saying now that they're going for the small guys and avoiding the big cheeses.
Admirals were to a penny back in those days, James.
Oh, okay. Showing my historical ignorance. Oh, Steve, you've got your physical hand up. Did you want to say something? You're on mute.
Sorry to impose on everybody, but I'll follow up in an email with Stefan and Robbie. But what I wanted to suggest is the facts here present. I'm persuaded by the case that Robbie and Stefan are making about this arbitrary imposition. But what I think it raises is a really interesting question about how accurate, in setting rules, how accurate should the rules be, and what are our error costs, and is there a potential benefit to saying that that either we are willing to impose a penalty if it's slight, and if it is 50.1% right, or we're even willing to risk some significant error case in order to get some societal benefit, whereas we wouldn't if the penalty is much more significant. And it seems to me that there is a utilitarian argument there that's a really interesting one that ought to be explored. In this case, what I find compelling about the data is that there's no evidence to distinguish these people from other cheaters. Well, suppose there was slight evidence that these people were not trying or something like that, then what would we think there? And so to me, this is a really interesting paper. I hope you get it published because I think, and not desk rejected with the consequent salary reduction, because it seems to me that you can build on this in a lot of important ways.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
So, the question I had was on your use of betting data, because I wondered whether, because presumably, you know, if it is, you know, incompetence of these jockeys, and we've got fully efficient betting markets, that should be reflected in the price of that horse and jockey combination to win that particular race. What I'm basically wondering about is whether you looked at, obviously looked at lots of metrics and looked at whether they're different for your guys that were banned and your guys that weren't banned. And I wondered if you looked at the betting market error, so the forecasting error, if you like, from the betting prices, and whether they were different at all for those guys that were banned and the guys that weren't banned.
Did you say the first part again, James? Just about the odds, I didn't catch it. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wondered if you'd looked at the kind of the forecast errors from the betting markets, because obviously you've got the betting prices, and I just wondered if you looked at that as, you know, whether they differed for the guys that were banned versus the guys that weren't banned.
Sorry, the very first bit you said something about the.
I was just waffling about betting markets and stuff like that. That's all.
So, just to get the logic, are you suggesting that if the odds are shorter or longer, they're more or less likely to be banned? Is it?
Well, what I'm saying is that presumably, you know, if this was, you know, a genuine attempt to ease off and do something corrupt, that might be reflected in a deviation from what the betting prices were, because, you know, the betting prices would reflect all available information about that particular race.
So the odds that we use are starting price odds. So they're and you're right. I mean, the odds are great because in some ways the odds are the only control you need, because as you say, they represent all publicly known information. Now we don't have in-play betting, so there is an in-play, of course, but we don't have access to that, unfortunately. But because the odds are set before the race, and because obviously the incident happens during the race, I'm not sure there's anything we can do there unless we have in-play odds.
No, I think James's point is that the ex-ante odds are actually what you want, and you want some measure of the deviation of the outcome from the ex-ante odds. What I'm less clear about, so I'm thinking, you know, like we think about expected points in football and the surprise points. So I know how to measure that. I'm not sure what, when you've got 7 horses in a race, what is the deviation of the odds from expectations? What is the forecast error in that context?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't thought about it.
There's a way
Other
to
than
do that would work.
Yeah.
I think maybe David is actually putting his hand up to give us the answer to that.
Sorry, James, I think I misunderstood.
That's all right. David, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I think there's a long history in horse racing analysis of using changes in odds during the betting period as an indicator of potential corruption. It goes back to Crafts about 40 years ago, in which changes in odds were equally powerful with odds and predict finishing places. And I know that the BHA devotes a great deal of resources to monitoring odds. They have a control room with lots of analysts, and what they regard as the principal indicator of a corrupt race is unexplained movements in the odds before the race starts. Clearly, in other sports, it's been mentioned in football, in-play betting is more common. And certainly in the courts, the incompetence that was mentioned regarding failing to score a goal, that the court would consider that that was part of evidence for banning a football player if the odds movements immediately prior had been bizarre, if you like. But we don't have much of we do have in play in the running, betting and racing, but not enough volume really to pick up trends. There's a lot of noise. But I would have investigated the role of the change in odds over some period before the start of the race, as well as the starting price in doing the modelling.
I think we just can't get that data, can we, Robbie?
Yeah, no, and just back to it, because I'm trying to understand exactly what you're trying to. So if you take football, where there's only 3 outcomes, like the odds are, like the odds can be compared across matches almost perfectly. So because it can only be home win, draw, away win. So 4-6 or 6-4 or 2-1 means something, and it means the exact same in a Premier League match as it does in a League of Ireland match or something else. But in horse racing, it doesn't work like that, because you could have, if you have a 2-horse race and let's suppose your horse is 3-1 in a 2-horse race, effectively has very little chance of winning. Now in a 25-horse race, if your horse is 2-1, he's got a very good chance of winning, because having a 2-1 shot in a race that has 24 other horses means he's a really hot favorite. Does that make sense? So we would have to normalize by runners or something like that to try and understand, but it's not like football, whereas the exact same odds can mean something very, very different depending on the conditions of the race. That makes sense?
Well, certainly, if there are multiple runners, then if the race is corrupted, then which horses are you looking at, which will show the greatest change in odds? For example, if the favourite seemed to be running in a not trying way, then I suppose you would look for the betting market. If there's an operation going on, then that horse would be going out in the odds because a disproportionate amount of money was coming on the second favourite. I mean, I think it's complex. It's complex for academics to model. The BHA are doing it every day. And presumably they have some signals that are just intuitive that get them suspicious. But certainly if they're getting live feeds of the odds, and they will alert the stewards from the control room in London if they think there's something odd going on, and that may indeed influence the stewards in deciding how closely to look at the race.
Is there when the stewards make their decision, do they ever refer to the fact of irregular betting patterns being observed, or do they just never say anything about that?
Is that to me, Stephen?
That's to anybody, to a horse racing expert. You, David, anybody who knows.
Stewards make their decision, is it? So when the stewards make their decision, what was after that?
Sorry?
What did you say at the start? I just didn't catch it.
Sorry. So my question is, when the stewards make a decision, like as in a non-trying case, but in any case where they say there's an irregularity, do they ever say, and we have been alerted to the fact that there were irregular betting?
No, never.
Do they never say that?
No. So if you're at a meeting, they'll announce a stewards inquiry, a passage of time will occur, and then they will announce the result of the stewards inquiry is, and one outcome is the placings remain unaltered. That's what they will say. Or another outcome is, the horse placed in 5th place has been upgraded to 4th place, and the horse in 4th place has been demoted to last, and that's all you'll hear. So if you want to get any sort of detail, you'd have to go into the BHA report to get clarity on. They won't even say why.
But do the BHA reports, though, because we have those, right? Do they say whether they would detected irregular betting patterns?
I haven't come across that, so I don't know, but I
mean, David might know more about this, but I mean, it seems to me it's sort of intuitive that they wouldn't reveal that they had this information because they don't want punters, they don't want the fixers to know that they're onto them. But David, is that right? Am I thinking about that right? Correctly?
Yes, I think that the main action, if there is severe suspicion, would be intelligence operation. As in other sports, you can demand phones and so on.
I think we're good.
Any more questions and comments from anyone?
Just to thank everybody for coming here to listen to us talk about horse racing for an hour and a half. And thanks to you, James, for facilitating us such short notice.
Thank you all for providing the content. It's fascinating talking. You're getting some rounds of applause. Sorry, let me just also give you one as well. Here we go, round of applause. No, thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Justin. It was really fascinating talk. We will wrap up. Although, Georgi, is that a hand you're putting up, or is that a rogue hand? No, it says it's an applause. There you go. So more applause. Great. Well, thanks everyone for taking part. We will be back again next week. Next week, we're going to have Vincenzo Alfano from University of Napoli presenting the good, the bad, and the ugly, the twofold effect of economic inequality on football. So we'll go back to football next week after horse racing this week. Thanks once again, everybody, and I wish you all a fantastic weekend.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.